It's the 12th of July 2017. The British Grand Prix is just a few days away, and to celebrate, an F1 live event is going on in London. Every Formula 1 driver's there, apart from #Blessed, who was too busy apparently. Anyway, at the end of the event, all of the drivers are told to get into their blacked out cars and drive off, not to interact with the hordes of fans amassing nearby. They all did this, besides one, Daniel Ricciardo, who I watched tell his security to off as he ran towards the crowds. I chased him down the street that day, and holding my phone out, mine was the last one he took, snapping this picture before turning around to the crowd behind me and shouting, "I'm sure he can send it to the rest of y'all." I never did, but a lot has changed since then. I've gained an extra chin or two, but Daniel Ricciardo remains one of the most beloved drivers to ever grace our sport. So here's his story. Daniel Ricciardo was born to Italian-Australian parents. His father was an avid racer, and thus inspired the young honey badger to take up karting from the age of 9. Ricciardo's first major win came in the Australian CIK Championship Series in 2005. The same year, he would transition to Formula Ford, but found himself racing in an uncompetitive 15-year-old chassis. Ayrton Senna might like that number, but realistically, finding any form of pace out of that thing was going to be a challenge. So when Danny Ric took that heap of rust to P8 by season's end, a few heads were already beginning to turn. 2006 saw another step up, this time to Formula BMW Asia, which from these photos appears to be what happens when you ask ChatGPT to come up with a racing series. Fighting against the likes of a young Earl Bamber and a bunch of names I'll be honest, never heard of, Ricciardo's consistency would see the Aussie never finish a race outside of the top 5, picking up 12 podiums and a pair of wins. He finished third in the standings come the end of the year, attracting the attention of a certain energy drinks company and paving the way for a promotion into Italian Formula Renault for 2007. Now part of the Red Bull Junior Academy and in a field containing future F1 drivers like Jaime Alguersuari and this would see Daniel's toughest challenge yet. There was no race wins this time, not even a podium, but Ricciardo still managed to end the year 6th and scored 6 times the points of his 2 teammates combined. This set him up for an assault on the full Euro Cup series the following year, and boy, did Ricciardo deliver. Five poles, 6 race wins, missing out on the title by just 3 points at the end of the year to the best weight saver on the planet. He'd then go one better in the West European Cup, taking 8 wins and the championship. Further dominance would be expected the following year in Formula 3. It wasn't a stellar field, obvious when you realise Alpine's new team principal managed to score points, so at a bare minimum, we were expecting Danny Ric to fight for the title. Except there wasn't a fight. 6 more in the win column, and another consistent season saw Ricciardo dominate the championship, 87 points clear of his nearest competition. That meant a return to Formula Renault machinery, now the 3.5 series in 2010. It was a similar story, consistent drives with minimal non-scoring finishes, seeing Ricciardo stake a championship challenge in his first full year in the category. He'd fall short in second come the end of the year, though as usual was miles ahead of teammate Jean-Eric Vergne and, Barbie over here. At the same time, Ricciardo was promoted to being the test and reserve driver for the Toro Rosso Formula 1 team, taking part in the post-season test in Abu Dhabi and walking away with the fastest time. Granted, this wouldn't mean much in the grand scheme of things, but with the main team tasting championship success with a fellow junior called Sebastian Vettel, many were keen to see if said success could be replicated. It's perhaps a little confusing then that when the F1 opportunity finally arose, it wasn't with the Red Bull team, nor their junior outfit. No, instead, Danny Ric found himself with the HRT Formula 1 team. That rather unfortunate name aside, we're talking about one of F1's most hopeless outfits in the modern era. The Spanish-based team would struggle for backing in their 3-year stint in the sport, with 2011 potentially being the most desperate of these, where their car ran slogans such as "Your name here" and "This could be you" and "I'm a pathetic waste of carbon fibre." Ricciardo would replace sport legend Narain Karthikeyan from the 9th round of the season onwards, and while a best finish of 18th wouldn't set the world alight, this backstage showing was at least enough to convince the Red Bull higher-ups that Daniel deserved a promotion to Toro Rosso for the 2012 season. That meant sacking off their existing drivers, Sebastian Buemi being confined to eternity in Formula E, and Jaime Alguersuari turning into a f***ing DJ for some reason. 2012 saw Daniel place with rookie Jean-Eric Vergne in the Toro Rosso. While the Honey Badger wiped the floor with the Frenchman throughout their time in the junior categories, this guy was no slouch. Paired with a car that was about as competitive as a kickboxing paraplegic, the duo occasionally needed some luck, or Romain Grosjean to fall on their side in order to pick up points. Ricciardo would break into the top 10 more often, doing so on 6 occasions over the season. However, a best finish of only 9th, plus Vergne's 4 P8 finishes, meant the Frenchman sat 6 points higher in the standings come the conclusion of the year. Both drivers would still be retained for a second season as teammates for 2013, however, and this time, with a slightly more competitive car, Ricciardo began to come into his own. The Aussie won the qualifying battle 15-6, scoring top 10 finishes even more consistently, while Vergne seemed to just give up in the second half of the season. There was also the matter of what was going on in the main Red Bull team, with a domestic going on between Vettel and teammate Mark Webber, as well as swirling rumours that both were in potential talks to go to Ferrari for 2014. Now with hindsight, it appeared that Ferrari were talking to pretty much everyone, even the pastor over here, but there was a genuine concern that soon Red Bull might need a new face to lead it through the turbo hybrid era, and the announcement of Webber's retirement at the end of the 2013 season meant the outfit now had a big decision to make. Both Vergne and Ricciardo were standout drivers, but as time went on, the Honey Badger looked more and more like the ideal candidate. He hadn't done anything particularly special in his 2.5 years in the sport, but his consistency and edge over Vergne in qualifying, as well as his highly regarded technical feedback, made him look like the more attractive option. From a marketing perspective, Daniel fit the bill much better as well. The 24-year-old exuded positivity and charisma. Vergne, meanwhile, was French, so come the 2013 Italian Grand Prix, Daniel was revealed as Webber's replacement for 2014. This was kind of perfect for Ricciardo. If he beat Sebastian Vettel, he'd be quicker than the 4-time world champion. If Vettel beat him, well, Vettel was a 4-time world champion. It's the same win-win situation that Lance Stroll had in 2021. However, he somehow managed to lose that one. There was also the massive advantage of driving for Red Bull, the team that had utterly dominated the past 4 years of the sport. Except it turned out that had come at a cost. 2014 brought new technical regulations, both on the aero and power unit side of things, and Red Bull's engine supplier Renault really underestimated that challenge. And by underestimated, I mean they were f***ing embarrassing. With all their focus on winning the last 4 championships with Vettel, relatively little effort went into the manufacture of the turbo hybrid power units for the new era of Formula 1. Some boys over in Brackley, meanwhile, had done the exact opposite, and since 2010 had been busy building an absolute monster of an engine. And that was about to take the F1 world by storm. Mercedes came out of the blocks firing in 2014. Red Bull, meanwhile, stumbled out of them for about 5 minutes before its French excuse of an engine went on strike and left its drivers stranded out on circuit. An Adrian Newey designed chassis was perhaps the only thing saving this dog of a car from falling outside the 107% rule. Vettel in particular grew to enjoy it about as much as one enjoys a colonoscopy. Ricciardo, meanwhile, with a lot to show and nothing really to lose, got to work. Round 1. Australia, Q2. Reigning world champion Sebastian Vettel has just about found enough pace to outqualify a Caterham, but it's still out of the top 10 shootout. Daniel Ricciardo, meanwhile, is 300ths off a Mercedes in the lead. The wet weather and Kimi Raikkonen's impression of Black Swan might not have helped that, but Ricciardo was quick to prove this was no fluke, as he went to provisional pole in Q3, beating Nico Rosberg's Mercedes by half a tenth of a second. Pole in his home event, on debut, looked to be in his hands, although #blessed had a little more in the tank, as Mercedes snatched it back as the checkered flag fell in Melbourne. The questionable reliability of these turbo hybrid cars presented an opportunity come race day, as pole sitter Hamilton's engine was quick to commit seppuku and knock the Briton out of the season opener. There were no such issues for Ricciardo, however, who, despite dropping behind Rosberg at the start, held P2 until the flag, taking a memorable debut podium before a few irregularities or the Honey Badger disqualified from proceedings. Even so, the Aussie had just put himself on the map. Ricciardo would be back on the rostrum later in the season at the Spanish Grand Prix, his consistency shining through, meaning he was there if the ever-dominant Mercedes cars ran into a problem, or themselves. The 2014 Canadian Grand Prix was a prime example of this. Qualifying 6th on the grid, Ricciardo fought through the pack, and when the pair of seemingly indomitable Mercs hit trouble, he took advantage. This was a clinical drive, with no mistakes, and by the end of it, Ricciardo was rewarded with his first race victory in Formula 1. 2 more back-to-back wins would follow in Hungary and Belgium. the former showing off Daniel's exceptional overtaking and ability to look at the braking point of a corner, tell it to itself and brake even later. Removing his 2 retirements, Daniel finished outside the top 5 on only 3 occasions, ending the season 3rd overall in the standings, 71 points clear of the man everyone expected to whoop his ass at the start of the year. No longer the top dog, Red Bull's fears over Vettel leaving would become a reality, as the German sold his soul to the Italians for 2015, and while yes, he never tasted championship success in red, he would leave Red Bull at the perfect time. You see, Adrian Newey was about as excited about these new regulations as I might be about a night alone with Jeffrey Epstein. To keep him in Milton Keynes, Red Bull allowed the designer to work on other projects, and with his full focus no longer on Formula 1, the outfit began to slip backwards. This wasn't helped by Renault taking an already hopeless excuse for an engine and managing to make it even more uncompetitive. Red Bull were now the 4th fastest team at the best of times, and this shows when you look at the championship standings. Daniel falling back to 8th, 1 spot behind new teammate Danny Kvyat. This was a rather weird part of F1 history where people tend to forget Red Bull were a big fan of this young Russian driver, being fast-tracked through the junior formulas, then spending a year in Toro Rosso alongside Verne before the Frenchman's Frenchness saw him overlooked for a drive yet again at the top team. Kvyat suffered from reliability issues far less than Ricciardo did over the course of 2015, in part explaining his 3-point margin over the Honey Badger come the end of the season. Daniel did manage to get 2 podiums in the mid-part of the year, but overall, this was one to forget for the Aussie. A return to form was needed for 2016 then, and a run of 3 consecutive 4th place finishes to start out the season looked to be a sign of things heading in the right direction. But come the Spanish Grand Prix, Red Bull would make a decision that would alter Ricciardo's career forever. So remember that time when I said Red Bull liked Danny Kvyat? Well, it didn't last very long. The Russian's replacement at Toro Rosso for 2015 was a young hotshot called Max Verstappen, and with the likes of Ferrari and Mercedes showing significant interest in the Dutchman's services, Red Bull needed to promote him to the main outfit as early as possible. When Kvyat turned his home Grand Prix into a military parade, the outfit saw their opportunity and took it. Daniel Ricciardo now had a new teammate, and really, this was like 2014 once again. Verstappen wasn't expected to challenge Ricciardo right out of the gate, yet that's exactly what he did. Mercedes going nuclear and Red Bull conveniently putting Ricciardo onto the less optimal strategy may have played a hand in things, but as we all know, Max Verstappen would come across the line to take victory in his first outing for the Red Bull racing team. Some will argue that Red Bull deliberately staged the strategies for that fairy tale beginning, but that wouldn't matter. Ricciardo had been rumbled for the first time in his F1 career. The Honey Badger wasn't going to back down without a fight, however, returning to the next race in Monaco and taking pole position, while Verstappen turned his Red Bull into an experimental 3rd chicane in the swimming pool section. Come race day, Daniel had everything in control. Only once again, strategy would end up dropping the ball, as at his final pit stop, his mechanics forgot the rather important ingredient of new tyres and allowed Hamilton to swoop in to take the victory. This loss was hard to take, losing 2 victories in a row after the winless drought of 2015. More podiums would follow after the summer break, but the Red Bull was still no match for the mightier Mercedes duo of Blest and Brittany. That was until Malaysia. On lap 39, we were in the typical position of Hamilton being light years out front and the pair of Red Bulls squabbling over the final places on the podium. Ricciardo was narrowly ahead of Verstappen on much quicker tyres, but the Honey Badger wouldn't be going quietly. Daniel held on with some brilliant defensive driving through the second sector of the lap. Many might have yielded the position by this stage, though Daniel had the bit between his teeth, remaining ahead in second place in a race which, just 2 laps later, was about to be turned on its head. Germany and pillows of smoke rising up into the air don't often bring back nice memories, and for Lewis Hamilton, this was where many deemed the championship to be over. The guy in second place, however, couldn't have cared less about that, and to inherit that race lead was Daniel Ricciardo, the Honey Badger coming across the line to take his first win in over 2 years and make up for some of the missed opportunities at the beginning of the season. Oh, and with that, we got the shoey, and the start of a long line of celebrities that will never risk gracing an F1 podium again. That win would help Ricciardo end the year 3rd in the overall standings, 52 points clear of Verstappen, but their first full season as teammates would be the big test in who would take that outfit into the future. Ferrari had spent the 2016 season being particularly Italian, though come the new era rules for 2017 had found their way once again. That relegated Red Bull back to the third fastest team, but Ricciardo's knack for being in the right place at the right time still managed to pay off occasionally. This was a super underrated year for Daniel, who took 8 podiums plus a superb 10th to first victory at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Granted, that took Hamilton's headrest to make a bid for freedom and Vettel's brain to do the same thing, but moves like this 3-man overtake into turn 1 showed us the Daniel Ricciardo we know and love. Despite Verstappen snagging 2 race victories in the second half of the season, Ricciardo comfortably beat his teammate to 5th in the standings. However, it did little to quell the fears that the Dutchman was still seen as the team's long-term future, and the Verstappen-Ricciardo rivalry was about to turn ugly in 2018. Red Bull found themselves that year with a much more consistent frontrunner of a car. Problem was, Verstappen was taking said car and throwing it into anything he could find. A clumsy move on Vettel in China threw away a potential shot at victory, one that Ricciardo took with open arms. Plus another crash at his favourite corner in Monaco allowed for Daniel to take a second pole around the tight streets there in 3 years. With Red Bull's hopes now riding solely on the Aussie, the Honey Badger did everything right off the start, controlling the lead until his engine remembered it was French again. On lap 28, with 50 more tours to go, Ricciardo lost his MG UK. That meant he was down 160 horsepower, with a very angry German staring right up the Aussie's prostate behind. On any other circuit, this would be day done. But this was Monaco when the cars were boats, so maybe this was the only place Daniel had a fighting chance. For each of those 50 laps, Daniel held on to the lead, defending like his career depended on it. And at the time, maybe it did. Exactly how he held on to take victory was almost beyond everyone, but the pains of 2016 would finally be washed away in what is arguably one of Ricciardo's best drives in Formula 1. The Honey Badger was on cloud 9, but thanks to events 2 races earlier, his loyalties were already being tested. F1 now headed towards Baku, and Verstappen was still driving like a terrorist. The pair found themselves dueling throughout the opening half of the Grand Prix, Red Bull allowing its drivers to fight, knowing that they would have enough respect for each other to not, say, bin it into one another and wipe out the double points finish. You can see where this is going, can't you? On lap 40, with just 11 to go, Verstappen moved over in the braking zone. The fan fictions will say Ricciardo pegged his younger teammate, and either way, the pair were out on the spot. History has been kinder to Daniel on this one, with the majority now appointing blame to the under-pressure Verstappen. That wasn't how things went down at the time, however. Team boss Christian Horner refusing to appoint blame to one driver and shielding Max away from the media backlash. For Ricciardo, this went down like a hot cup of diarrhea. The Aussie was beginning to see a shift in the team's long-term intentions, and it was a picture that didn't have him at front and centre. There were also concerns about Red Bull's switch from Renault to a Honda power unit for 2019. At the time, these concerns were rather valid, given all Honda had achieved since their grand return in 2015 was having turned McLaren and Fernando Alonso into a glorified meme. In hindsight, this concern aged about as well as, well, one of my recent videos. It was a particularly pivotal time, as Daniel's contract ran out at the end of the season. With no avenues open at Ferrari or Mercedes, many expected him to stay put. Voluntarily deciding to leave a front-running outfit was almost unheard of. But Ricciardo did it anyway. On the 3rd of August 2018, Ricciardo announced that he'd signed for the Renault outfit for the following season. This caught a lot of people by surprise. Was it a late April Fool's joke? Had someone hacked his Twitter? Had he gone senile? Well, whatever it was, that announcement wasn't lying. Renault gave Daniel a lot of money, and then an early impression of what to expect. As for the second half of his farewell season at Red Bull, its engines had a tendency to go bang in the back of his car, and Daniel's car only. Verstappen, meanwhile, had finally remembered how to drive, and this pair of events allowed for the Dutchman to usurp his more experienced teammate for the first time come Abu Dhabi. It was a frustrating end for what had been a massively successful partnership, and sadly, it signalled the start for what was soon to come. I've seen several people mark Ricciardo's switch to Renault as the beginning of the end for his career. I personally disagree with that point. While Daniel wasn't fighting for wins anymore and arguably didn't have a car he was anywhere near as comfortable with, it didn't stop his blistering and consistent pace. The Australian Grand Prix may have seen Ricciardo elevated to new heights only literally, though after that, a string of top 10 finishes saw the Honey Badger easily outscore teammate Nico Hülkenberg and end the championship 5 spots ahead of the German in 9th in the standings. 2020 was even better. The field had closed up, Ricciardo felt more in tune with the car and had what I would argue is his second best season to date behind 2014. In a condensed 17-race season, Ricciardo scored 2 podiums and only fell outside the top 10 on 3 occasions. He entered the year 5th in the standings ahead of both Ferraris and his old Red Bull driven by Alex "They Race Me So Hard" Albon. Renault's newfound form looks set to continue in 2021. but if only Daniel had waited around to see it. I remember waking up on my birthday to the news that Daniel Ricciardo had agreed to part ways with Renault at the end of the season, which hadn't even started yet by this point, and make the switch to McLaren. This was fantastic news. We hadn't seen this upturn in form from Renault yet, McLaren looked to be the ones on the rise, and best of all, Daniel wouldn't be working for this prick anymore. The start of 2021 was filled with trepidation then, and a double points finish at the season opening Bahrain Grand Prix was a promising start, but then everything began to unravel. It became clear early on that Ricciardo was struggling with the new car. Teammate Lando Norris claimed he wasn't enjoying his experience either, but could clearly drive around the problems much better than his teammate. This was perhaps most evident at that year's Monaco Grand Prix, where, having switched to the beloved classic Golf livery, Daniel pootled around the Monaco streets as if he was driving a classic Formula 1 car, eventually being lapped by Norris, who waved him on by and caused social media to have an utter f***ing meltdown. Another string of consistent points finishes looks alright on paper, but compare that to Lando's 4 podiums, and the problem begins to present itself. After suffering damage from the Bottas bowling alley at the Hungarian Grand Prix, Ricciardo entered that race miles off the pace in 11th, looking dejected as he tried to work out exactly what was going wrong with his season. What he needed was a stroke of luck, and he was about to get it. The Autodromo de Monza suited the McLaren cars perfectly, Ricciardo beating Norris in the sprint to line up second for the race behind old teammate Max Verstappen, and off the line, the Honey Badger saw his chance and swooped into the lead. We all know what happened in that race, and yet many assumed that Verstappen bonking Hamilton on the head was what gifted Daniel the race victory. In reality, the pair were never ahead of the McLaren, and Daniel managed the race beautifully to come across the line and take what ended up being his last race victory in Formula 1. "I never left, just moved aside for a while," was his quote over the team radio. That was what McLaren expected when they signed the Honey Badger 18 months prior, and 3 more top 5s to close out the year sets a promising trend for 2022. Except Danny was about to leave again, both metaphorically and, as it would turn out, literally as well. McLaren were in a trend at this point of developing their car for longer than their main rivals, meaning in the second half of the year they'd looked to have made great strides on the competition, but as a new season rolled around, they were back to being dog shit. Never was this more apparent at the beginning of 2022. The ground effect rules had just come into force, and the Papaya Army were on the back foot, with a car even more alien to the Honey Badger than ever before. Once again, Norris dealt with those issues better, and while Ricciardo still had a year remaining on his contract, McLaren were looking for a way to push the Aussie towards the back door. A crash in practice for the Monaco Grand Prix appeared to be the crunch point for Ricciardo's stint in Orange. By the summer break, the Honey Badger was announced to be leaving at the end of the season, and McLaren had stolen yet another Aussie from the French to be his replacement. We were left with this sad farewell for Daniel, who scored barely a third of his teammates' points total by the end of the year, and it really looked as if it was all over for the Honey Badger. But all was not lost. Daniel wanted to remain on the F1 grid, and really he had 3 options here. Option 1 was to take up Gunther Steiner and Haas's offer for a race seat alongside Kevin Magnussen. Since this was Haas, Ricciardo decided to sack off this idea, leaving him with 2 alternatives: sign for Mercedes or return to Red Bull, but in the guise of a reserve driver. At the time, I remember hoping this guy went with Merc. Thinking back, I don't quite know why. If you want a shot at getting back on the grid, Red Bull's where you go, given they treat their drivers like children on a dodgy fairground ride bought from Wish.com. Sure enough, it wasn't long before one of them was ejected to a slow death in Formula E, that being AlphaTauri's Nick De Vries, and with Sergio Perez's future also on the chopping block, Ricciardo was back with one mission in mind. The 2023 Hungarian Grand Prix saw the Australians' triumphant return to the sport, in a move that, if successful, could see the Honey Badger go back to his former seat alongside Max Verstappen in the main team. Things went well out the gate, beating new teammate Yuki Tsunoda on his return, but just 2 races later, yeah, we know what happened. At the time, no one realised quite how significant this crash was. Ricciardo would be out for a few races, and as a replacement was just some Kiwi Marco's singular eye hadn't begun to consider for a full-time race seat. That Kiwi, however, was Liam Lawson, and he was about to impress. Lawson's performances turned so many heads, in fact, that many were calling for him to be given a seat for the 2024 championship. However, Red Bull were committed to giving Ricciardo a chance, and in fairness, he did return to form with a P4 at the Mexican Grand Prix. Sadly, this was merely an anomaly when we consider where we are now. Ricciardo has shown some good performances in 2024, but his scrappy start to the season painted the picture the media have stuck with from then on in. When Red Bull denied an option to promote him over the summer break and proceeded to lose the Constructors' Championship in the process, the writing was on the wall, and the 2024 Singapore Grand Prix would end up being Daniel Ricciardo's final outing in a Formula 1 car. It's a huge shame this guy couldn't get his fairy tale ending, or an ending at all for that matter, racing his final laps, not actually knowing if they'd be his last or not. But this is Formula 1, and more specifically Red Bull. Daniel knew what he was signing up for back in 2023. But Formula 1 has lost part of its sparkle in these last few days. The title of this now very long video for my standards was Why F1 Will Miss Daniel Ricciardo. The Honey Badger brought a new charisma to the sport, a genuine personality, one that was magnetic to anyone who knew him and broke the mold of the typical stone-faced robot who graced the grid when he joined back in 2011. Take the comments from drivers and the media around the Singapore Grand Prix. Take the outpouring of love from the fans when Daniel scored that final fastest lap and driver of the day. This is a man who has brought so many on board to the sport and played a huge role in making it as successful as it is today. We have a lot to thank Daniel Ricciardo for. The laughs, the memories, the results. Well, not these ones, but you get my point. From a career move perspective, maybe things in hindsight don't look so great, but I don't think I'd be as invested in Formula 1 today were it not for Daniel Ricciardo. So thank you, mate. If you enjoyed this video, it took a hell of a long time to put together, so a like and a sub to the channel would really be appreciated to help it grow. A big thank you to the patrons and channel members who get early access to my content as well, and if you want to get involved in that, then you can head down to the links in the description below. I'll be back later in the week with another video, but until then, have a good one.